Thank you very much, Julian and Joe, and thanks to the Nature Finance and the Open Government Partnership for convening this webinar. It's really timely for us at TNFD. We just closed our consultation on our draft guidance for the technology and communications sector, which obviously includes data centres. And with thanks, Julie, to your team at Nature Finance for supporting us as a knowledge partner. So it's really timely for us to be talking about this topic. If we could just move one slide forward, I was told that many of you might be completely new to this initiative, TNFD. So let me just start with some basics of who we are and what we cover. If you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so TNFD was established based on this recognition that nature is no longer a corporate social responsibility issue. It's a central strategic risk management issue across sectors in its own right. It's critical to addressing climate change, but it creates risks and opportunities in its own right. And it needs to be brought into business strategy, centrally into risk management, and into capital allocation decisions of financial institutions and businesses themselves. So it's really bringing nature to the center of business practice and strategy. And for technology, Julie, you set it out beautifully. Obviously, data center infrastructure highly dependent on, in particular, water supply, but many other services, particularly hydrological services, and has various impacts and water stress and water pollution, exposing them to physical risks. And there are various estimates for the World Economic Forum and others that this is highly financially material. So that big picture case for TNFD, definitely pertinent for technology writ large and data centers in particular. So TNFD was established to help with this, to provide a risk management and disclosure framework that can help businesses in the real economy and financial institutions to identify and assess and manage these risks, and to identify and seize on the upside the opportunities. It was launched back in 2021. It's a global initiative. We have a global task force and a global team. It's market-led. You can see the 40 task force members. These are senior executives from corporates and financial institutions and from market intermediaries across sectors and geographies that form that central design team. And they're supported by a much larger group, which we call the TNFD Forum. It now has over 1,800 members. And they've provided the help to develop a framework. So what's in a framework? At the center of it is a set of disclosure recommendations that I'll briefly show you, and an accompanying package of guidance so that organizations can assess how they depend and impact on nature, how that creates risks and opportunities for them. Then they can, most importantly, manage those issues effectively and report on them. So it's both a disclosure framework and really action oriented. And I won't go through all of the details, but we're part of the G20 Sustainable Finance Roadmap of the SFWG, the Sustainable Finance Working Group, and been supported by both the G20 and the G7. And all of our funding is from government or philanthropic support. And important that we're science-based, which is part of my role as technical director. We have really valued knowledge partners like NatureFinance. So we could go to the next slide. As I mentioned, at the heart of the TNFD framework is a set of disclosure recommendations. And when we get to the next slide, you'll be able to see the latest numbers and patterns data for about TNFD adoption. So adopters are organizations that have made a public commitment to disclose in line with the TNFD's disclosure recommendations. So this is the latest announcement we made late last year. We have over 730 organizations who are adopters. So they've already disclosed or they're planning to disclose in the next couple of years. They represent, as you can see, over 22 trillion in assets under management.
Apologies, Emily. I'm just going to fix this because of the screen sharing settings are just
Don't worry, I can keep speaking as
I've
you're
managed
going.
to mess them up, but I'm switching and we will.
I'll just keep going and people can
Thank you.
listen as well as
Okay,
watch.
it's better now.
No, great. Yeah, so we've got a large amount of assets under management, over 22 trillion now, and also in publicly listed companies, over 9 trillion US dollars from over 55 countries. So the good news is that adoption and interest on a voluntary basis of these TNFD disclosures on nature has really rapidly grown since we launched our recommendations, which was back in September 2023. So this is just 2.5 years later. It covers actually the majority of sectors, as you can see, and actually a large proportion. I was just going back to the data this morning. It looked like about 70, so nearly 10% seem to be within the technology and communications sector. So strong interest, and then regionally, particularly strong in Asia Pacific and Europe, but also rapidly growing in Latin America. And we've been running some capacity building in Africa. So if you can just go to the next slide, I'll just explain, because Julie, you alluded to sort of the voluntary nature of many of these frameworks. So TNFD is a voluntary framework. As I set out, we're a market-led initiative. We've been designed by the market to provide something practical and decision useful for investors and for the businesses themselves. And we see that voluntary guidance and recommendations scaling through these three routes. And you can see here on the screen the learning from climate. So on the left is the kind of corporate reporting architecture from climate, where the Paris Agreement set those global goals, and our sort of sister organization, the TCFD, set out recommendations for disclosure on climate. And that then fed into S2, which is the global standard developed by the IFRS for climate-related disclosures. And that then feeds into the standards and regulations of different jurisdictions. And so we see the same thing happening for TNFD for nature. I've just given you a flavor of all those companies that are adopting on a voluntary basis, now over 730. They're doing it because they see the case for doing the assessment and reporting. They might have investor demand, demand from civil society stakeholders, or they might be getting ready for the expectation of standards and regulation. But we're also seeing TNFD recommendations informing that global standards development. Notably, the ISSB made a formal decision late last year to move into standard setting on nature-related disclosures, drawing on the TNFD's recommendations and metrics and guidance. So we're supporting them, and they're planning to put out that exposure draft for consultation in October this year. And then we continue to support GRI, who set standards on impacts. And then there are some regulators, so governments, who have already moved before those global standards were finalised. Notably in Europe, we work to support the EFRAG, the regulators in Europe, as they've developed their sustainability reporting standards. So voluntary, standard setting, and regulators all drawing on the TNFD framework, and that's creating that consistency and credibility that investors are looking for. So we could go to the next slide. Just briefly, at the heart of the TNFD framework I mentioned are a set of 14 recommended disclosures, which are listed here. They are by design built from the 11 TCFD disclosures for climate, which has really helped us to get the speed and traction we have. They were all carried over to nature, and then we added 3 further recommended disclosures that are all quite specific to nature and specific to location. On engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities and affected stakeholders, and then on priority locations. So they sit on these same 4 pillars of strategy, governance, risk and impact management, and metrics and targets. And those organisations that are starting to disclose will be disclosing on a subset or all of these disclosure recommendations. So in a nutshell, if we move to the next, I know we want to cover a lot. So I won't go through all of the package of guidance, because I know we're short on time with many speakers, but there's lots of complementary guidance, because when we first produced the TNFD's recommended disclosures, the market said there's a new topic, nature, we don't know quite how to get started. So we literally have guidance on how to get started. We also have sector-specific guidance, whole range of mapping on the interoperability with other standards and regulation, and all of that's available on the website. But I wanted to focus on 2 bits of guidance, which are on the next slides. So if you could go to the next slide. One of the most important pieces of guidance TNFD's produced is something called the LEAP approach, which is really like a sort of step-by-step due diligence process for how to identify and assess how you depend an impact on nature and how that creates risks and opportunities. It has these 4 phases and is broken down into 16 components. And this has been really widely taken up. Much more even than our disclosure recommendations. It's harder for us to track use, but we think there are in the thousands or tens of thousands using the LEAP approach. And then we make that real on the next slide for particular sectors through our sector guidance. And this is where, of course, it gets specific to technology and data centers. So you can see on the left-hand side the long list of sector guidance that the TNFD has already published. And in each one, it sets out the disclosure metrics that are sector specific, which are expected on a comply or explain basis in TNFD reporting, and also provides some additional considerations for when you're doing an assessment using the LEAP approach. So as I said, it's very timely. We published our draft guidance for the technology and communication sector in January. We just closed the consultation. It includes data centers. So the team is actively going through the feedback now and doing some focus groups and workshops to consult. And we'll be finalizing that guidance in late June at London Climate Action Week. So technology was definitely on our list. We're planning actually now to finish sector guidance, but because of what Julie alluded to, the scale and concentration and growth of the technology sector, the importance of data centers in terms of their dependence and demand on water, on energy, on land, on critical minerals, the significant waste and pollution across the value chain, this was a high priority for us to finish. So if you could go to the next slide, I won't go through the details, but we have produced, and we're getting feedback on this, a depiction of the value chain. We're covering organizations that include obviously data centers, but go beyond it. And I think important to emphasize, we adopt that full value chain perspective. So we recognize that many risks, dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities might arise upstream with water-intensive manufacturing and mineral sourcing, and downstream beyond direct operations, and might be through the scope of their sourcing decisions and contractual relationships, not just in their own direct operational control. And of course, data centers, are key in that for many parts of the value chain in the technology sector. So if you go to the next slide, I think we can whiz through this one. Just go to the next slide because I know we're short on time. I wanted to briefly mention, some of what this illuminates. You'll have to go to the document for the full details, but these concepts of dependencies and impacts and risks and opportunities are really brought to life in the guidance, things around water stress and scarcity, land use constraints and permitting risks, exposure to supply chain disruption from extreme weather events, dependence on critical minerals, all of that across the value chain is set out. And we also developed a complementary case study on water dependency in the technology sector that focuses on data centers. So that's also a really useful resource. So let me just finish with my final minute on the next slide on metrics, because as I mentioned, the disclosure guidance that we set out not only covers, how do you do the assessment in the sector, but what are the expectations for disclosure metrics? This is not comprehensive. I'm just showing you one example here. This is the guidance on the application of TNFD's global metric on water withdrawal and consumption from areas of water scarcity. But it's just to bring to life how TNFD then sets out if a company is disclosing against this in this sector for data centers, it should then include direct water consumption in data center operations, indirect water consumption, water usage effectiveness, and cycles of concentration. So please do delve into more details with more time, but just to give you a flavor of just one piece of the guidance for the metrics, which you would then get transparency about through TNFD reporting. So with that, back to you, Joe and Julie. I hope I kept to time.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's incredibly rich. All we can do is get just the flavor of what it's about, and it's really worth diving into in a deep way on each of these. So, up next, we have Patrick Blake from United for Efficiency Initiative at UNEP. And thank you again, Emily. The Sustainable Procurement Guidelines for Data Centers and Servers.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much to the Open Government Partnership and NatureFinance for having me here today. Again, I'm from UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. I'm working within our climate change division on an initiative, as mentioned, United for Efficiency. So we've been working on energy efficiency and climate topics, working with governments on standards, regulations, procurement specifications, for electricity consuming devices like air conditioners or refrigerators, which often consume a lot of percentage-wise consumption in a country. So, of course, more recently with the growth in data centers, we saw that as an opportunity to build upon the approach that we followed in other sectors to adapt the approach to the data centers that are being built. So I'll describe that in more detail. But yeah, I don't think I need to really reference. We heard already the growth of data centers and really the impact that that's having not only on electricity, but water usage as well. So it really provides an opportunity for governments to not only look at how to attract data centers, but how to govern them effectively to balance the economic opportunity with energy, water, and community impacts. So with that, going to the next slide. Yep, you can go to the next one. Yeah, so on data centers through this slide, really just highlighting that data centers are a complex system. In terms of the consumption within data centers, we see, of course, the IT equipment consuming a large part, but beyond that, the cooling within data centers also consumes a large amount in many data centers as well. So that's important that there's regulations and specifications for that. And of course, cooling is closely linked to the water usage and also the local climate conditions. So it's important to think through on where data centers are placed within a country and globally, regionally as well. So again, these are not just digital assets, but are connected across the energy, water, and climate perspective. Next slide, please. Here, just so globally, we've seen historically most data centers demand being built in U.S., Europe, and China, but we really see the growth shifting to other markets, emerging markets in particular. And there, in terms of the efficiency of the data centers, we see that there is in the emerging countries that they're not as efficient there. So there's opportunity that those data centers should as well be shouldn't have more a climate environment impact in emerging countries as well. Malaysia is a good example. We recently had a mission to Malaysia earlier this month. So Malaysia has really become a regional hub for data centers, in part due to the moratorium that has been put in place in Singapore. So again, it's important to not only think about data centers within a country, but beyond that, regionally and globally, because they can shift to other markets. So there, we see the growth in the number of data centers under construction and planned, and also there's a centralized task force for this. And what we're really encouraging them is to consider the different specifications, criteria that they can have in terms of data centers. And I'll provide a bit more detail on that. They've also do have some incentives for more efficient data centers, as you can see referenced here. So again, perhaps an opportunity for other countries to look at as well. So again, it's really an opportunity for Malaysia to consider their resource constraints in energy and water, and then the incentives and regulations that they can put in place. Next slide, please. Then, as mentioned, UNEP has put out procurement specifications. These are for data centers and computer servers. So this is something our government can use for their own procurements, whether it's at the national level, state level, as just mentioned. In Malaysia, we've engaged at the state level in Johor, where the data centers are being developed, or at the city level as well. So within this guidelines includes different criteria in terms of sustainability. We had a lot of input from policymakers, companies, NGOs on this. So I think it's something ambitious, but something that can be implemented as well. So some of the criteria includes the power usage effectiveness, the water usage effectiveness, so just reference as well, cooling effectiveness as well. I won't list them all, but those are some of them that are incorporated. I also want to reference that not only does it have those criteria, but there's levels that would have to be met for each of those as well. So it's important to not only report on it, but also have minimum levels that need to be met in terms of efficiency or cooling within a data center. So again, this is something that's readily available. We're engaging with governments globally on it, and it would be interesting to hear from some of the speakers and participants opportunities to really deploy this within their governments as well. Next slide, please. So really in shaping data centers outcomes, so priorities that we see for governments is really, so transparency is important, but how do we move that into investment decisions? So the criteria, having criteria across those different KPIs mentioned previously, we believe can be important for siting of data centers, providing incentives, that it should be ambitious in terms of efficiency, water usage, climate as well. So that's readily available. And governments can use policy levers to strategically define that within their operations and work with companies in partnership. Then data centers often sit across multiple ministries, from information to energy, to environment, to buildings. So it's something that's important to have that interministerial engagement. And that's, I think, something that we learned from Malaysia, that they really are bringing the ministries together on that to have a guideline for data centers more broadly. In some cases, there's different criteria going from different parts of the government, so it's difficult for industry to comply. And then finally, data centers need integrated planning in terms of infrastructure, that energy infrastructure, water infrastructure is something that is built long term. So it's important that there's clarity on what data centers are being developed, and if they're being developed, that the companies follow through on that, on the purchase, because we see that often just because the company puts in plans that they don't necessarily follow through on that. So those are some of the areas that we see governments really being able to provide the role. So with that, on the next slide, again, thank you to the organizers, and look forward to the further discussion. Back to you, Joe.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. And hopefully we can have the speakers, we can share these slides, this packet with everyone, because I do think, as one of the people said in the Q&A, there's a ton of really great information there, and it's hard to absorb it all during this session. And so hopefully people can go to that. So now we go to Hélène Costa de Beauregard from the French Ministry of Ecological Transition on sustainable AI policy. And so, Ellen, please take it away. And thank you again, Patrick. That was great.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you uh, for inviting me to this webinar. Always happy to share our um, good practice and the way we see sustainable AI should be deployed in France, but also happy to learn from the other speakers as well. So, hello everyone. My name is Hélène Costa, and I work at the French Ministry for Environment in a unit called Ecolab. In a nutshell, we are the chief data officer for ministry and other ministries, including the Ministry of Transport and Housing and Urban Planning. And because of that, we are spending a lot of time thinking about sustainable AI and participating to the deployment of the sustainable AI strategy in France. So before delving into the sustainable AI strategy of France that I tried to give like a very quick overview of, I just wanted to share a few data points with regards to the more global AI strategy that has been deployed in France since 2018. So we actually in 2018, before LLM was even a thing, France has been launching its first national strategy for artificial intelligence, and it's structured around three pillars, which are research, training, and economic dissemination of AI technologies. Since 2018, this strategy has mobilized over 2.6 billion to date, and it has been deployed in three phases. The first one from 2018 to 2022 was about strengthening the research capacity between 2022 and 2025, was spreading AI through the economy, and now we're focusing applying AI in key sectors. But through each of these phases, it was very important and has always been at the core of our strategy to develop an efficient and sustainable AI system. First, to ensure that this new sector stays aligned with our climate goal and our zero net emission commitments coming from the Paris Agreement. But also to ensure that AI will help support our energy and ecological transition. And even like before AI was really a thing that everyone was talking about, and it had just such an impact on our energy system, France already committed to a sustainable and efficient digital sector. And we were quite a pioneer in this way because we are our first national strategy on digital technology and the environment that was launched in 2020 first, and that transformed, morphed into a law in November of the same year. So it was quite easy for us to reflect about how to think about AI in terms of sustainability and efficiency because we are already framing the debates and the deployment of the digital technology and the digital sector at large around those same topic. So we are implementing a comprehensive set of policies to foster this sustainable AI policy, both from the hardware perspective and infrastructure, with a specific focus on data centers, of course, but also we're also looking to softwares and the efficiency of AI models themselves. The first pillar of our strategy is actually around, and it's quite obvious, a low carbon and reliable power, because that's really where some of the most consequential impact of AI currently is. And if you want to reduce this, the carbon footprint of AI, first you have to focus on the energy and the electricity, which is powering your data center. In France, we are lucky enough to have a very big chunk of our electricity that comes from decarbonized sources. It's 95%. It comes mostly from nuclear. That's really like the bulk, and over like 50% of it. And then the rest comes from hydro power and and renewable like solar and wind. We are also like overproducing this decarbonized electricity and like sending it to our neighbors, helping also them to decarbonize their own grid. So that's, I would say, like the first way we are focusing on reducing the environmental footprint of AI. Next slide, please. The second pillar is something that has been built substantially at the EU level, and that's a dedicated regulation that supports the deployment of sustainable and efficient data center. And actually in Europe, it has been over like 15 years, more than 15 years, that at the European level we have been working with the data center ecosystem to try to develop best practices in terms of efficiency of data centers, because there is an alignment between the work of the industry, which is always trying to increase the efficiency of their chips and of their data center to be more competitive. And so thanks to this cooperation at the EU level, we've published a code of conduct, which is a sum of all the best practice around the efficiency of data center, and it's regularly updated. And this code of conduct is now included in the Energy Efficiency Directive of 2023. And with that regard, there is a requirement for all EU data centers to report around some of their environmental indicator, including electricity consumption, their PUE emission, water consumption. And now we're discussing at the European level how to create a label to give more transparency around those environmental indicators at a data center level, and maybe applying some threshold. And in France, we have a dedicated law that was actually published in 2018 and expanded later on to include large data center with a threshold for them that they need to reach by 2030 of 1.2 for their PUE, and for like smaller data center, they must reach this PUE. They must reach a PUE below 1.4 by 2030. Because of that, because we have extra decarbonized electricity, we have also been trying to attract, I would say, additional data center to be implemented built in France, just to make sure that we help them decarbonize using our electricity. And to do that, we have created a dedicated task force to identify specific location where those new data center could be built. And among the criteria, we've decided also to think about how to minimize the environmental and land footprint of those data centers. How can we use brownfield to build those new data centers? So that was really something, those environmental criteria also have been taken into account by this task force to identify new sites that are open for new data center to be built on. Then moving on to the slide on Pillar 3, the other side of the coin, where once you've focused on the environmental footprint of data center and infrastructure, is also to look at the AI models, because the compute that they will need also has an impact of how you will dimension your data center and how many data center will need to be built. The more efficient your AI model is, the less compute it will need. So because of that, in France, we have developed a dedicated framework for sustainable AI. It was published in June 2024. It's not only, it's really dedicated for any kind of AI models, but it also includes LLMs. And the idea was really to think about the definition of what frugal AI means and how you can make people in the mindset of not only reducing the environmental footprint of the AI system they are developing or using, but when you are using an AI model, we first want you to be sure that you need this AI model. And also, that's even like a step further when we are talking about frugal AI. You have to even question the goal that you have set. Let's say that you're thinking that you need to reach 100. And to reach 100, obviously, you need some kind of AI help. Well, maybe if you only set your goal at 80 instead of 100, the results will be good enough, and you actually do not need to reach 100. And by reducing your goal to 80, you might not need to use AI anymore. You might not need to use the same kind of AI and a more efficient AI. So that's really one important aspect of this framework. And we've also developed a methodology to assess the environmental footprint of your AI system and provide you with best practices. And actually, at the international level, the ITU latest standard that was published in February of this year get a lot of its inspiration from this general framework that we have in France. The last pillar of our strategy is obviously like research, and we have some foundational research looking both at the hardware and the software. I will not get into these very technical details. And finally, obviously, like the work that France can do is one thing, but it's very important for us to also ensure that the issue of sustainable AI can be tackled at the global level, within global fora, because it was like presented by other participants, and you might have seen that already many times, but the impact of AI is really like a global one, not only through the climate impact and the emission of the AI system, but also due to the impact on certain country to get the raw material to build this data center, these chips, and have all those model works. So the idea with the Sustainable AI Coalition is really to be an advocate at the international level to have sustainable AI including within the current international discussion. It has no legal status, so it's more like a network, and we are using various levels of action to be able to get the message across, including dedicated work stream when we see fit. One, for instance, is around which we call a global approach, is a work stream in which ITU, IEEE, and ISO, which are the main standardization body, come together and discuss what should be like the main challenges all of us should tackle when we developed a new standard around AI, for instance, or what are the indicators that all of us should include in our standardization process, and it really ensure consistency with the upcoming AI standards. So this is a broad coalition. We have over 200 members coming from international organization, government. NatureFinance is one of our members, and also big tech industry and research. It's very important for us that research be included, and of course, like NGOs which are both focusing, like NatureFinance, on green AI, so ensuring that the environmental footprint is taken into account, and also how to leverage AI for the benefits of climate. I just wanted to finish my presentation with the AI milestone of 2025 that we've been able to reach collectively. So one was the adoption of a resolution during the UNEA, so the UN Assembly for the Environment. In December, we adopted the first resolution on environmental sustainability of artificial intelligence within this fora. So it was like a big victory. It was something which was tabled by one of our members, Kenya, which has been like very vocal on the global scene. Then we had the AI Impact Summit, which had a dedicated work stream around resilience, innovation, and efficiency. And out of this work stream that was only open to international organization and country with a consultation of stakeholder, we managed to adopt voluntary guiding principle on resilience, innovation, and efficiency, which has been endorsed by over 20 countries. Also a playbook on advancing resilient AI infrastructure, very interesting. It gives you like an overview of the main challenges around the subject. and a Resilient AI Challenge, which is a hackathon around model compression. And finally, something which is like really important, it's around the fact that the UN dialogue on AI governance will start in Geneva in July. And it's very important. They have an online consultation open until April 30. So if you want to say anything about what should be included in this UN dialogue on AI governance, let's say sustainable AI, for instance, don't hesitate to participate to this online consultation and share broadly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And we're going to move quickly to the next speakers, our colleagues from Kaduna, Nigeria. We have Tara, the cost manager from the government side, and Michael Chenkuru with the open data specialist from the construction sector transparency initiative. And we want to get to your questions, so thank you for posting those. We're going to move quickly and try to stay on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Tara
much,
and Michael,
Joe.
take it away.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joe. Amazingly, very wonderful speakers. We've heard from them today, and so excited for us to be here. The reason simply why Kaduna is also in this room is because Kaduna State is an OGP member, and we've built commitments through our OGP action plan on data use and the publication of data. And this data is an international standard, and it's so important, and we call it the Open Contracting for Infrastructure Data Standard. This is so important to show that OGP commitment produces real systems, not just lying documents. So as we know, standards, disclosure, accountability backed into contracts is actually exactly why this webinar is, and that is what is asking about data centers as well. So my colleague Mike will quickly jump in and explain more, because Mike has supported Kaduna State on that cost to help us build something that has made us the only state in Nigeria out of the whole 36 states in the country to have this system functioning and running. Thank you so much. Mike, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Yes. On March 1st this year, Iran attacked an AWS data center in Bahrain. The consequence of that, it was the first of a barrage of attacks that day. More data centers in the United Arab Emirates were hit. And the consequence of that is that data in the Kaduna portal, 1,400 projects disclosed by over 30 agencies, was made unavailable. It really brings into perspective the age-old statement of a butterfly flapping its wings in Japan and a tsunami in UK. But that underscores how intrinsically connected we are in this day and age. So we come into this discussion and in this room with battle scars, not on theory, but having really been affected by the impact and the value of data centers. But compute, as my colleague from France was saying, it's data centers are compute intensive, and compute is coming to Africa. Africa is now part of this discussion as well. There are a couple of data centers being built in South Africa and some in Kenya. But in the context of what we do here, especially here in Kaduna, is data centers and data center governance is not just the land this system sit on, but rather the data that is in these centers, because that data is used to make the governance decisions. Yeah, and when people do not trust who is building these data centers, they have no information about these data centers, they do not know who is paying for it, and their lives are being affected by them, then there will be questions, there will be a lack of accountability. That sort of environment is actually what led Kaduna to adopt the OC for IDS data standard, a tool in which you can make information proactively available for different stakeholders and to understand what is happening. And once you do that, you build trust. And when people understand this, then there is more adoption. One of the biggest resentment or adverse or fight against data centers is coming from a lack of access to information. So the data standard really helped Kaduna be where it is in as far as implementing disclosure and also some elements of artificial intelligence. Now, somebody mentioned earlier about the governance, and one of the elements of governance is structure. Disclosure of structured information helps there be a governance framework which then people can use to understand what is going on. In the context of what we are doing, OC for IDS is a flavor of open contracting for infrastructure data standards. So it is a universal language in which infrastructure information is disclosed across the various sectors. But here's the thing. We would also need a framework like OC, open contracting for data centers. That would help some of the questions that we are answering and discussing here. For example, the land. How do we disclose information about land? Who pays for it? Water. Data centers are water intensive. Liter per compute. How do we calculate that? Who pays for it? When things go wrong in data centers. So that is a whole corpus of information, and without a structure on how that information can be disclosed, there will be a governance breakdown. So one lesson in all of this as I conclude is that beyond the infrastructure, beyond the building, there's also the element, and this is a multi-faced component of the data within these data centers and how it is shared and how it is used. Because once that is also known, as we build and advocate for all of this, then there'll be better trust and there'll be easier adoption. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that wonderful presentation. For Kaduna State government, everything we've been doing also is also aligned to what our colleague here has mentioned from UNEP and also about the framework. But one thing I need all of us to understand is that for Kaduna State, what we've been able to do is to publish data across water, energy, land, as well as resilience. So important. It's important that we have that joint understanding. And one thing also finally is that we built, accountability infrastructure for roads and hospitals. And it's very important to know that we've disclosed projects across these cycles, and data centers are infrastructure. And so the same rule should also apply to build trust between government, the private sector, and as well as citizens, because these are the three critical components that intertwine under the Cost Infrastructure Transparency Initiative. So thank you so much. Thank you. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, thank you. You guys have a couple more minutes. I just wanted to make sure, because I'm not sure we saw out of your slides was, I see. So here's the OCI for IDS. Great.
Yeah, actually, that is sort of what we are saying, that if there was a universal traffic light system for disclosing data center information, how would we go about it? So we're sort of giving from the infrastructure side, water per project. Maybe the data point would be water per unit compute, energy constraints. The data source would be energy source and grid dependency. So that's sort of mapping. So when we work together, and I think TNFD has already a framework, when we work together and come up with a data standard specifically built for data centers, then disclosure and tracking what is going on about all of this becomes a whole lot easier, as well as reporting.
Great. Thank you. Then with that, if the panelists want to turn on their cameras, we can go ahead and take the Q&A. We have a number of questions and answers, and I think other people will put those up. So in the remaining few minutes that we have, the first question, recording of the webinar. We will of course ask if we can distribute the slides, and yes, we are recording the webinar, so we hope to post that in the follow-up email to this, especially for anyone that missed this session or had to only attend part. The next one from my current boss, not my former boss, Julie, is Aiden Ayakuza, and he asked if the data centers create new jobs, or how many of them they are, and where they will distribute. I don't know if anyone has mentioned a job reporting standard or a standard statistic. Julie, please go ahead.
I'd love to answer this question because it's something that I've found really striking as we've done more research in this area. A lot of times when data centers are offered by companies to communities, it's around the promise of substantial economic uplift with employment. And it's true that there often is a short-term employment surge in terms of construction jobs, which sometimes can be up to thousands of workers to build the hyperscale centers. But once they're operational, they typically employ several dozen workers. So to give you some statistics, for a typical 250,000 square foot data center, there's usually around 50 full-time workers. And in Africa, for example, a 100 megawatt data center is estimated to create around 500 construction jobs, but only 50 permanent operational roles. So a lot of the figures that you see quoted don't disaggregate between construction, indirect, and operational headcount. And pertinent to this conversation from a governmental perspective, often some of the subsidy agreements that we've seen for data centers don't require local hiring as part of the terms and conditions. So that's also something that can be built into the specs.
Thank you. And specifically with regard to this is where the accountability side comes in, is that some of the local governments or some of the activist groups in the United States are asking for clawback clauses that essentially, if standards are not met or if performance metrics are not met around jobs in particular or tax benefits, that some of the subsidies can be peeled back on some of these areas. And that's part of their contract with the local governments. In the interest of time, we'll move quickly to the next one. I think it was answered. Has France thought about developing standards that can be used outside of Europe? Is there any work done on the heat generated from the data centers for sustainable agriculture, solutions that regenerate the soil, or carbon capture solutions? That seems like, Hélène, that's a question for you. So if you could answer that in a minute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, first, yes, yes and no. So there is a provision under the Energy Efficiency Directive for reuse of heat from data center, but not for agriculture specific, but rather to be used in heat system of a city, for instance. So that reuse of heat is included under this directive. And I see that there is also something about the fact that US tech companies successfully lobby the European Commission. Actually, I wanted to say that the first step was to collect information around data center, and the second step is to have to provide kind of like electronic labeling and rating of data center, not at a global level, but data center by data center, with the objective to have this new regulation adopted at the end of 2026. And there is currently a consultation open on this new regulation that will be closed in 2 days. So I'm sharing the link in the chat if you're interested in participating in this consultation.
Thank you, Hélène. And we've learned so much from other sectors like the extractives, just how important project by project or site by site reporting is, and how aggregate statistics just are not the same thing. They're not useless, but they're not anywhere near as useful. So thank you for adding that. And let's see. on data standards. Let's see. Any other final comments, I suppose, before we wrap up? I'm seeing are African governments offering subsidies for data centers? Which ones? What level and type of subsidy? I'm not sure, Patrick, if you have that information or if anyone here has this information.
In Africa, I don't have that particular information on the top of my head. So perhaps just to generally respond to it, we've seen that in some countries, incentives to attract data centers to the country is something that has occurred. What we've really emphasized is that there should be metrics in terms of sustainability that I went through earlier, on energy efficiency, water usage, that those are incorporated within that. So it's not baseline data centers, but it is ones that won't have the environmental and impact on the population, the grid, more broadly. So I think that's why it's important to use incentives to ensure sustainability. And then maybe just briefly on the standard side, we do reference international standards within the recommendations that we have, including from ISO and IEC. So it's not that we're developing new standards within our work. I think it's important that there is harmonized standards, even if sometimes those processes do take some time. Thanks.
Thank you. And we have two last questions. We're running very short on time. Have any of the speakers seen examples of companies not within the AI industry exploring this topic, giving competing demands for resources in key regions with data centers? So I guess those would be complementarities or competition with those others.
I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's a really great question. And I can imagine in contexts where we're seeing a lot of communities having to sue their own governments and related tech companies to get information on things like water and energy usage, and then learning that it's up to a quarter of what the local population is demanding, that there will be similar pressures from other corporate actors that likewise rely on that same infrastructure going forward, that are potentially feeling the brunt of that.
Emily, please.
Yeah,
Go
I would
ahead.
just add that what we're seeing is as companies do these assessments of nature-related issues in across all sectors, there's an increased interest in multi-stakeholder landscape and seascape approaches. So recognizing that these risks have to be managed together. So that's the positive side on it. So trying to identify who else they need to collaborate with. And there was also a question I answered in writing in the chat about engagement with local communities. So just wanted to make clear that that's a really important part of the TNFD framework, recognizing that to identify, assess, manage, and disclose these issues effectively, you need to have meaningful, high quality engagement with those groups. And there's a really interesting report coming out in May being led by Shift, who do really interesting work on this space. They've found like 800 examples where this is financially material, both from the risk and the opportunity perspective. If you do or you don't have high quality engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities, it makes a real tangible financial effects. So do keep an eye out for that report coming out mid-May, and I put a link in the response to interim findings in a webinar we did a week or so ago.
Thank you. And I think we are at just about at time. And let's see. So we will be wrapping up. And so, Julie, did you have any final notes, any final comments to go to conclusion?
Well, I think this has been an incredibly rich conversation. And I think a number of the questions asked are absolutely the right questions to be asking. And if one searches for information, it's very light right now in the public domain in response to these questions around things like tax incentives, jobs, et cetera. So there's a lot of work, I think, to do in the domain of disclosure, transparency, accountability in this context. I really also want to emphasize that we're talking right now about data center infrastructure specifically, but the guidance that, for example, TNFD is working on looks across the whole sort of tech value chain, and it's really striking. You know, when you look at, for example, the production of semiconductor chips in a context like NVIDIA in Taiwan and their reliance on access to water with dams, you know, that are struggling to maintain themselves in a context of growing global warming and related pressures, that there are a lot of hidden, embedded nature and climate related dependencies across the AI value chain, and surfacing that is hugely important. From an accountability perspective, it's also incredibly important from a market and economic and investor perspective. So from all angles, this is an area where people would benefit from a lot more information and analysis and insight going forward.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our speakers, Emily from TNFD, Michael and Tara from Cost and Kaduna State, Hélène from the French government, Patrick from UNEP. I think what we know from OGP is that these are solvable problems. They have precedent. They will not be solved on their own, of course. We need governments and companies to adopt these standards around measurement, around disclosure, around accountability for these, and incentives to ensure these things. And that is a cross-sector platform. Of course, I would be not doing my job if I didn't say I think OGP is a wonderful accelerant for getting a lot of these standards and ideas in place, and moving forward, and helping celebrate those first movers, those places that are taking those first steps, like we've heard from France and Kaduna today, and helping to get those other standards in place. And so, again, I just want to thank everyone, especially NatureFinance, for putting this together and for the idea. We do need to continue these discussions, and I hope to see them not just continued as discussions, but continued as commitments in OGP action plans at the national and local levels, where we can track them and share information on what's working and what isn't. So with that, thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for your insights and for participating in this. And we will try to get slides out with the permission of all the speakers, and we'll send recording out in the follow-up recording. And thank you, everyone, for putting up with some of our technical glitches as we learn. But I think we'll have wonderful discussions going forward. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.